It's lesson 8, part 2, and we're working on Firebase authentication. Just before we do, a bit remiss not to just go over quickly assignment 2. I'm going to do that now. So it's 30% of the grade. Now, we're doing a demo on Wednesday. Sorry, this should say 3 p.m. I'll have to modify that from 3 to 5 p.m. You do not have to submit, though, until Friday morning. Okay? So you still have time to make additional changes after your Wednesday demo. You have Wednesday night, you have all day Thursday and Thursday night. Yeah? No, there's no marks. If you can come, please come. I understand if you have a class or you have to work, that's fine. So I'm not marking you for being there. I realized that time wasn't ideal. That was the best we could do in terms of time. The Farm Tech students weren't available on the Friday to come back to class, unfortunately. Okay. So you don't have to hand it in until to submit till the beginning of class on the Friday. So you're basically just resubmitting what you've already submitted. Just one group submission. So give me the link to the repository again. And also resubmit your mockups, because I want to be able to compare what does the app look like compared to how you mocked it up. Did you build? Is what you built roughly what you planned to build? So same description really of the app about what you're doing, but just going into the requirements. So you're actually creating the working app as much as possible. I want to see that the UI is somewhat similar to what you planned. It doesn't mean you weren't allowed to deviate from it, but just roughly what you told the Farm Tech students they were going to get is at least an approximation of what they actually got. Not completely different. Okay. You should be able to implement Firebase authentication. It'll be fairly simple after today's lesson, and all the code's going to be on GitHub as well. If you need it, that's fine. Okay. So obviously the workflow may vary a little bit depending on how you planned it out with your partners from Farm Tech, but roughly this is the workflow. Right? They pick a topic, they get a case study, you're presenting questions, they answer those questions, you're going to give them a score, and you're going to log all this in Firebase. And then if there are related resources, that you make that content available once they're done one of the assessments. So I just want to see on GitHub that everybody's contributed commits. They don't all have to be to the master branch, obviously, but that I can see everybody basically who's done what. If you've got different branches on there and one person responsible for merging or pull requests, that's fine. But I will look through the different branches. I should see that everybody's contributed. So most of the marks are for the functionality. That's about half the marks, and then a quarter for the authentication, and a quarter for the UI. How is the user experience? Is it consistent? And does it sort of match what you, by and large, what you mocked up? Is it a professional looking app? And then same, you have a separate link for your individual. So again, give everybody in your group a mark out of 5 as to how did they make a fair contribution and did they do quality work, as well as just explain what part of the project. I mean, I should be able to see it from the commit, but what were you responsible for? And also roughly how much time do you think you spent on? I'm not asking you for a detailed log. You can ballpark it. It's basically the same as what you did for assignment 1. So again, that's due in 2 weeks. Yeah. No. What time have you spent since the first submission? If you spend 10 hours on first part, you spend another 10. Just say I spent 10 hours on assignment 2 on the build. And here are my peer marks. Does anybody have any questions? Yep, Sean?
Can we lock it in portrait mode, or does it need to be able to rotate?
Up to you. Up to you. Well, actually, let me just. I'm more concerned that it renders consistently. So if we run it on different devices, the users will get a similar experience. If in order to do that, you think it should only be done in portrait mode, that's something that you as a group can decide. That's fair. So long as in portrait on a Galaxy tablet or portrait on an Nexus, it basically renders fairly consistently. That's okay. So it is not required to rotate. You don't want it to. Okay, good question. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, so we do have a couple weeks to finish until you have to submit that. And then assignment 3. So just where are we going with the next few weeks? So what do we want to do? Let's back up for a second and look at our schedule. Okay. So week 10, it's due. And then you have 2 more weeks. What I'm really looking to see you do over these last 2 weeks would be 2 things. One, if you want to add, if there's any things you didn't get to finish that you wanted to add, or you want to add some polish, you have 2 more weeks to do that for assignment 3. Okay, so this is basically kind of a working prototype, but then I'm giving you a chance to add some additional things to it or polish it. The other thing I want it to be done by the second last week of class, which is actually the second last week of the semester, is I want you to publish it to the Play Store. So we'll look at this before that class. How do we generate those APKs? What are the hoops we have to jump through in terms of getting a content rating, creating screenshots in the Play Store, etc. So you should be able to download and install each other's apps once assignment 3 is submitted. So we'll go over that sometime in the next few weeks, either in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We'll look at the publishing piece, so you have at least a week to publish it. Okay, and then we should be able to do at least 1 class and possibly 2 where we can play around with Kotlin. So we can maybe look at rebuilding the music store with Kotlin. Just see so that we get our feet wet and you can compare and get a feel for what Kotlin is like. I have a feeling that's kind of the way Android development is going to go in the future. I think Java is eventually going to get phased out in favor of Kotlin. And that's my suspicion. And then our final exam, again, the second last week of the semester, because it's Good Friday at the end. So our semester is a little shorter, and we've already talked about the final exam, basically something similar to what you did in the midterm. But it will focus on more on things we've done in the second half of the term. So I may even give you a starter project. I may give you a working project with Firebase, and you'll focus on things like authentication, scrolling, and navigation. So nav and scrolling are things Sean will try to look at next week so that you can implement them for your prototype for assignment 2. So that's basically what we're going to cover here in week 9. We'll do navigation and scrolling. We'll maybe have 1 class on kind of sensors and networking. So using some of the hardware in the phone. So how do we make a phone call, use the GPS, things like that? How do we integrate those things into our app? And then a class or 2 we can do with Kotlin. Okay. All right, so let's go back. So we've got our login activity. It doesn't do anything. So let's actually do the register button click first, because that one's easy. We'll just register an explicit intent and load the register activity. So that should be pretty easy. So in my login activity, on my register button, I'll add a click handler. So I'll just generate an event handler and call a method show register activity. You can call it anything you like. And I'll just use Android Studio to create this event handler here. We're just using an explicit intent. We did this several weeks ago. I think it was lesson 4. We looked at using implicit and explicit intent. We could also do this all in one line. I could just make this entire thing my parameter of my start activity. If you prefer to do it in one line of code, no problem. So I'll apply that change and just make sure clicking my pink button loads the register activity. If we wanted to add a login button to the register activity, we could. I'm not going to do that. That would be simple enough for you to add. Add a button that says, already have an account, click here to log in, and it would start an intent to load the login activity. So just the reverse of what we're doing. So I'll just apply that, make sure it works, and then we can get to the code for authenticating a user. Simple enough. So load an explicit intent takes us here. So again, we're going to need Firebase Auth. And this time I don't remember to name. It's AuthDB. We'll also declare our 2 text edit texts. We've got our I'll also declare our progress dialog. And I'll just run the necessary imports. And we'll initialize these things in our onCreate, just like we did in the register activity. We'll get an instance of our Firebase Auth. We'll instantiate our 2 text. One other thing we're going to do a little bit later is we'll add a check that if our user's already logged in, when this activity loads, we'll just take them to the main activity. So we'll bypass the login screen if the user's already logged in. We'll get this working first, and then we can add that at the end. So now we're going to need a click handler for our login button as well. I'll just leave this code up for a minute in case you need to catch up. So nothing complicated here. Nothing's actually happening. We're just instantiating and setting things up that we'll need to let users log in. I'll just put a comment in here. We'll come back to it. So we'll redirect main activity if user is already logged in. We'll add this code afterwards. And we'll just put in a placeholder that we can run this code. This has to go after we initialize that Firebase DB, because until we initialize it, we aren't able to check if we have a current user. We need that class to tell us if there is an authenticated user. So this has to happen after Firebase Auth is instantiated. So I'm going to go back to my login activity. I'm just going to add a click handler to my login button and generate a login method. I'll just call it login user. You can call your method anything you like. We'll get the username and password form. Now, Luke, I think you asked about this earlier. We do not have to worry about hashing the password. We just pass it in, and Firebase Auth library takes care of it. Now, we could validate in case they're empty, or we can just pass in whatever they enter. For now, we'll just do it that way. We'll send a message. Show the progress dialog. Now we want to call sign in with email and password method of the Firebase Auth library. So again, we'll pass in our two parameters, email and password. And we want an incomplete listener. Context. And I just chose new on-complete listener, Android Studio. For me, anyway, completed method stuff. So we're really writing similar code to what we already wrote on register. We have a task, and we can evaluate it's going to return an is successful Boolean. If we're successful, what should we do? We've got a valid credential. Yeah. Yeah, let's take them to main activity. We can call finish here. And then we'll create a new intent. Actually, I guess we could dismiss, probably my order of operations wasn't very good here in register. We probably should have dismissed the progress dialog first. I'm actually going to move this. I'm going to put it even before. We'll dismiss the progress dialog, and then we'll either run the intent or we'll use a toast message to show an invalid login to the user. So we'll just use a toast message. We'll dismiss the dialog first, and then we'll decide if we're redirecting or showing a toast message. So let's try this. We'll put in an invalid login. We should stay on the login activity and get an invalid login toast. If we put in abc@test.com and abc123, we should get taken to the main activity. That's the goal. I know some of you are still working. I'm just going to try it, make sure we coded it correctly, and then I'll put the code back up. I'll actually lower my keyboard here so we can see the toast clearly. So if I use no password, all right. Well, let's see. What did we miss? Oh, okay. It's because password is empty. So I guess we do need, I'll try it again and put an invalid password in, but we will need to validate or the Firebase auth crashes. I won't leave it blank, but I won't put in the proper password. I'll just put ABC. So that's invalid. Now I log in. We go to main activity. So we should add validation. There's no point running the call to Firebase if we don't have at least string values for email and password. So we'll add that validation. So if our email is empty, I should be able to try this again now and it won't crash. I leave either field blank. The same validation we used on our registration form for these two fields. Thank you. Don't forget the return statements. Thank you, Omri. So I'll just run this again and make sure without an email or password, it doesn't bother trying to authenticate me. So if I leave them both blank, I get invalid email. If I put in an email value, I get invalid password. So it doesn't crash. And we don't bother attempting to connect to Firebase unless we have values for both fields. So we've got a few things left to do. We've actually done the hard parts. We want to add a check now to our login screen that says, if we're already logged in, just skip this screen and go straight to main activity. And then on main activity, we want to add a sign out button. We can use a floating action button, and that will sign the user out and take them back to login. So if we come up here, we can just check. So if our auth DB has a get current user method, pretty handy. Get current user returns null. Actually, sorry. Oh, right. Our get current user, we'll do it this way, is not null. No need to show them this activity. In that case, let's create an intent and load main activity. I'll do this one in one line. So I'll just call start activity to intent. On line 45 and 46, I created the intent and then I called start activity. This time I'm going to just do it in one line. We will create and pass the intent in a single line of code. If I run the app now, I've logged in, so it just jumps me right to main activity. If I click back, it's just going to kick me back here again. Interesting. Right, yeah, because we did it on create. So yes, we could move this to on start. And so now we're going to add a floating action button here, and that floating action button will sign the user out and then redirect them back to the login activity. So I'm going to open up my main activity here. So let's add. If I click on go into my design view, notice beside floating action button, there's a little download arrow. What do you suppose this indicates? Notice the other buttons, none of them have it. Yeah, it means it requires a dependency in order to use that. This is from the Android design repository. So we'll need a reference to this. So it'll ask, do we want to make a reference to the Android design repository? I will say yes. Okay, so that's going to add to our build.gradle. It adds a reference to com.android.support.design. So we can see green here, this just got added. So the floating action button is part of that third-party design component. It doesn't come with Android Studio directly. So now I can add the floating action button. Notice the little download button's gone away. So I'll just put it in here. So for my color, whoops, actually, sorry, I'm going to cancel this. I want to actually go and grab the material icon for sign out first. I want to download that to my computer and add that as an image resource to the project. And then we can set that as the icon on our floating action button. Bear with me. I'm not sure if I put the link up here on Blackboard. Sorry, give me a second. I will put up the link as to where we grab that from. I meant to throw it up here for you. I forgot. If you just refresh the lesson 8 folder, it'll take you to material.io, that link. And it will actually highlight, because there is a bookmark on it, it's this exit app icon. So over here, I don't actually want the SVG version. I want the PNG. So I'm going to click this little, I'm going to click the white version here. We don't want the black text. We want the white, although we may have to set the foreground color anyway. And we want to download the PNG. This will actually create a small zip file with 2 versions. That's okay. You can use either one. So I'm going to download the PNG. I'll just save this to my downloads folder, and then we'll use Android Studio to add it as an image resource to the project. So I'll save that. I'll go to my downloads folder. So there's a zip here, which I'll just extract. And it creates this baseline exit to app white. And there's 2 different sizes. That's 18 dp. I don't understand the difference. So that's 36 by 36. And this one is 18 by 18. Doesn't really matter because Android Studio is going to scale them properly anyway. So again, we're grabbing this exit to app icon. I picked the white version, so I clicked here, and then I downloaded and extracted the PNGs.
What is the SVG one scale?
The issue is because of the way I want to add it as an image resource, it won't convert the SVG. It needs to convert it to an XML representation, which the SVG, I tried it with the SVG first and it wouldn't generate the XML. I think I just did something wrong. I think there is a correct way to do it, but then I tried again with the PNG and it was fine. So I'm just going to show you that one. You can try it with the SVG and see. I had an issue with it, but I don't think there's a problem with the SVG. I think I just did something wrong. And unfortunately, I didn't have Amrit there to correct me. Didn't have my debugger in chief available at the time. Okay, so now, if I click on File and New, think within Drawable. So within App Resource Drawable, I'll click New Image Asset, and then I can browse to one of those 2 PNGs. So I'm going to call this one, I don't want to call it Launcher. I'm going to call it Logout. call it IC logout foreground. And now I'll browse to that PNG file. So I'll go to my downloads folder. I think I'll just pick the 1x version. So I'll pick my PNG and click OK. So you can see it gives us the exit arrow. And I'll just click Finish. So now we have, I'm not sure where it went. Well, we'll try it. So I'm going to put my floating action button on now. Notice I don't want to drag it to the bottom because it nests it inside my list view. I'm going to put it up here inside my constraint layout down here. So for my color, I'm going to pick my accent color. So now I'll call this logout. I'll give it an ID of logout, FAB, floating action button. I'll change my I think I want to change the foreground tint. Just double check that, but that's what I want. Check my notes. It's actually just the tint, not foreground tint. I'm going to set the tint property. Yeah, I think this is white, Android color white. And then the source, I click here. Here's I can now pick my IC logout icon. So under the SRC property, if I click the ellipse, it brings up the image resources in the project. So I want IC logout. So this will give me a square, or we could make it round if you want. You can pick the IC logout round. I'll pick the IC logout. And now it's anchored up here, which is somewhat problematic. So we want to move it. So under our constraints, we want our bottom to the bottom of the parent. And we'll choose our, let's see, end to end of parent. So that'll be down here. So we'll run it and see how it looks. We may need to modify it a little bit. We shouldn't get our login screen. It will keep me logged in. So it should just jump us right back to the main activity. We'll see where it shows up and how it looks. Okay. Not quite. So we got the right color, but we want to play around with it a little bit. You know what? We may have downloaded, let's see. We may have to download the other version. We'll just go in here. So we've got our color. For a second. I think the problem with we may have downloaded the white one and we're tinting it white, so we don't see it. I might have to download the other PNG. We'll just see. Yeah, but it's green. Okay. I'm going to see what happens if I download this one. Maybe I want this one instead. I'm going to re-download and re-add it. We'll try that process again. Oh, there's black. Okay, well, let me just check my other project because I had it working. So we'll see, I'll compare what I did. Our tint was white. Source compat. Foreground. Let's just check. I'm going to add the image asset again. IC logout. I'm not sure why it's not showing up for me here as an image asset. We will still need to add a click handler here to actually sign out. That's fairly easy. That's what we want. So I used mipmap and my source. And now we can add a click handler to the button. Right now our button doesn't do anything. Yep, there it is. Thank you. Now we can add an on click. And we'll create a logout method. The logout is simple. We'll call the signout method of the Firebase Auth class. We'll call finish, and then we'll use an intent to take the user back to the login activity. So on main, in logout. Now we don't have an instance of Firebase Auth here. We have only have an instance of Firebase database. So in this case, we are going to need an instance of Firebase Auth. So this is where we want to make sure that we have it with a different name. We're calling it AuthDB. We'll instantiate on create get instance. Now later on, we'll come back here, and this is where we can also add an authentication check to main activity. So if the user is not authenticated, we'll take them back to login. We'll do that in a minute. We'll do our logout first. Go on logout. I'll sign out. And start activity. Within one line, we can do intent. So this should sign us out. And if this works, the only other thing we'll need to do is in our on create, we'll need to check that the user is logged in before we load them in activity. We'll just apply those changes. And now clicking log out. So I'm already logged in. So it just starts up on main activity. If I log out. Now at the moment I can go back. Oh. So we also just want to add a check here. We'll call get user. And if that's null, we'll call start activity. So we'll take them to login if they are not authenticated. I'm not going to bother adding this floating action button in this same code to our artist activity, but we could do the same thing to make that private as well. It's just a straight copy of the methods, copy of the code, copy of the floating action button object. Amrit, you had a question? Yes, thank you. I'll finish. We don't do anything else, and then we leave. believe it basically stops the execution of the activity, but let's actually check the let's go and actually look exactly what it does. I don't know if it's just my machine or the Android or the developer docs that are. Maybe it doesn't like the fact that I'm using Firefox. I don't know. So finish seems to happen before it's destroyed. So it release anything, basically release all memory, and then it needs to be created all over again. All right. Now we can register, we can log in, and we can provide an authentication check. Now, in terms of your assignment, how is this going to work? In terms of registering and logging in, you should be able to pretty much use what we did today. You don't have to reinvent anything. The code is going to be the same in everybody's assignment. It's going to be the same as what we've done in the music store. That's fine. The one thing that you're going to have to adapt a little bit is we've looked at saving and reading data to Firebase, but right now all of this data is independent of users. Right? If we all connected to the same, use the same app, we could all save artists and tracks, but there's no record of who is saving what. In terms of the app you're creating, probably we're going to have multiple users. So when users are doing a quiz or an assessment, you're going to want to save their answers and their score along with their user information. So each assessment, you know whose it is. So if we think about what we've done here, what else are you going to have to do in your assignment in order to make that work? How are we going to do that? Okay, you could do it as an extra. That would work. You actually don't need to. Right, get current, when we call get current user, right, you actually, it has getters. So you can actually get their email anywhere. Yes. Yes. Yeah, it basically works as if it, in the web, like it was a session. So it's an application level variable for the life cycle of the app. Yes. Up to you. There's not required. This would actually allow you to do it. Yep. Yeah, I'll leave that up to you how you want to implement it. Okay, so one thing you'll do is you'll just use get username dot get email. Okay, so that's one thing you're going to have to do. What else will you have to do in terms of saving their answers and attaching them to that user? So you can use this to identify who the user is. So even before you push it to Firebase, you're going to need to do something So let's say in our music library, we wanted it to attach each artist to a user. So each user had their own list of artists. What would we have to change? We'd have to change something here. Right. We would need to change the artist class so that we had a property for the user, right? So each artist was attached. Now, well, I guess there's a few ways of doing it. Sorry. That's one possibility, is you attach the user onto the quiz responses. How else could you do it? How did, Kevin? You could. We don't actually necessarily need to. We actually did it, kind of did it here, right? We didn't do it within the class because every track is attached to an artist. Now notice there is no artist ID, yet the tracks are attached. If we go and look in Firebase, let's go back and look at my music library. So we've managed to nest the tracks. So you could nest all of the quiz attempts and responses underneath one user. So how did we do this, considering that our track class has no reference or no mention of the artist class? How did we get this to work? You got it. So in our artist, sorry, in our right, in the artist activity, I believe, right, here's the reference. Rather than calling a reference just to the artist, the whole artist collection, we appended on the ID/tracks. So if you want to nest a user's responses, we'd actually potentially have 3 nests, right? It might look like this. So the instance that you reference might look something like this. It might be users, so everything would go under the individual user. This would be all of their attempts. And then within one attempt, they would have potentially multiple answers. So when you set up that instance reference, that's where you have control to set up the nesting as you see fit. Let's have a look. Good question, Dan. So let's go back to our users. So yes, Firebase generates a user ID and there's a getter. So when you call get current user, there's a get UID here. So that will give you that ID. So if you want to use that as your path to nest. Yep, or you could use email. You don't have to use the ID, up to you. You could use either one. If you prefer the identifier in the database to be more obscure, then you could use the ID. If you want it to be more clear, so if you look at the data, you can recognize it by email address, up to you. Both will work. Do as your team sees fit. So this line from the artist activity, line 55, that's kind of the key. That's what you'll need to do if you want to nest the user's responses. Is identify the user either by their email or by their unique ID generated by Firebase, and append that on to the reference. So I think this is working as we wanted it to. So I'm just going to push. Okay, so we have a bit of time left. So I'm going to give you several options, and you can do whatever you want. We can either spend 20 minutes looking at that Google authentication tutorial, or you could spend 5 minutes doing an overview and you could take a stab at it. You have the resource on your own. You could work on the project, or I can set you free. I'm good with any and all of those. Hardeep? Okay. You do it on your own, or we'll start going through it together. Okay. All right. So the link's here. I will confess, I haven't actually had time to try this yet. Okay. This article's a bit old. We should have all of this stuff. We should be okay, I would think. This is setting up a new project, so we can kind of skip all of this. Okay. So obviously in Firebase, we need to enable Google sign-in. Go back to sign-in method, and let's enable Google. And we'll just click enable here. And we'll save. We may need those API keys, the ID and secret. We'll see. They're here if we need them. So this is all creating the project, setting up Firebase. We've already done all this. We better check Google Play services. I think we already have that just from our initial connection to Firebase, but we'll go check at the app level. Build.gradle, we'll just make sure that's the case. Yes. GMS Google service. I think that should be what we need. I know this says and we'll try it. Okay, so we are going to need the client sign in. Just maybe have a quick look at before we do it. We'll just maybe look through the steps and then we'll see what we've got time to. So we're going to have to configure the sign in options to use our web client ID, which is here. So it calls get sign in intent method of the Google sign in API, and it will return a result object, a result variable. All right, Google sign in result called the result, and then we're checking if it's successful. So it wants us to use an instance of Firebase. We already have this code instantiating an instance of Firebase Auth, so we've already got that running on our login activity. After our user signs in, we get an ID token, and exchange it for a Firebase token. All right, let's give it a shot. Okay, so maybe let's add a sign in with Google button to the login activity first so that we can invoke this somehow. So let's go to. You know what? Yeah, we probably should. Now this is a very out of date dependency, but Android Studio will tell us what the latest version is. So let's copy that and add that to our app level build doc. It's so old that it uses compile instead of implementation. We want to change that line. Implementation. Yeah, and we're up to 1601. So let's upgrade. And we better sync. And then maybe below our pink click to register button, we'll add a Google sign in button that we can use to invoke this code. Just close a bunch of this stuff. So on my login activity, let's add one more button. We'll call it Google button. We'll enter our constraints. Will be to the bottom. Register button. You know, we could use a cool image button and put the Google icon on there for now. Just standard button. We'll add the handler. Okay, so it looks like this. It's going to keep loading my main activity because I'm logged in, so I need to click my floating action button to log out. Right now, we cannot get back to the login activity while we have an active session. And in general, these login sessions, they don't time out. They're cached on your device. With most apps, once you log in, you don't have to log in every time, right? It keeps your identity. I think the only way I'd have to log in again here without logging out is if I shut down the emulator completely and did a cold boot. Right, I should still be logged in, I believe. Yep. Okay, so now we've got to log in with Google. I know I'm going fairly quickly here. We'll try and get it implemented in the time we have. I am streaming it. And if not, we can even finish it up the start of next week's class if we don't quite get there. So this stuff is already done. Okay. So this is where we configure Google sign-in. Doesn't exactly tell us I think this is going to happen in our click method, but okay, so this happens in the onCreate method. So we'll set up the builder. So we'll just copy that block. I think it's the same code here. Although interesting, this doesn't mention the web client ID, and their code requests a token. That's interesting. Okay, hang on. I'm just going to look at how Google said to do it. This is, no, these are both Android. Let's look at the date on here, because that tutorial is a little older. Okay, we may as well go with the one that's 2 weeks old, I'm going to say. So rather than typing the code, I'm just going to copy it. We'll see if it works, and we'll make changes as we go. So this goes to into our onCreate method. Google setup. Okay. We'll use default sign-in. That just went into our onCreate. Also in the onCreate, create a sign-in client object. So we'll copy this. I'm not going to worry about this part for now, checking for the current user. We just want to try and log in if we're logged out. I know generally copying and pasting code is not exactly the best way to learn. I'm just curious if this is actually going to work. Did I miss something here? Your sign-in activities. Doesn't tell us what type this variable is. But it doesn't tell us to define this anywhere. Let's check, go back here. What does get client return? Oh, man. We're creating an instance of the Google Sign-in Client class. Okay, so we're going to skip this. We've got our button. We've got our method. So we're going to use an implicit intent. We'll copy this to our Google login method. Oh, I didn't need to declare this globally. We need to declare it at the class level, instantiate it on create, and then we can reference it down here. We may have to create that, have to see what that constant represents. So then we're going to this may have to go in on create. So Google Sign and Google Sign Client and Google Sign options for the imports. We'll need to also import that. And we'll need this method, which is going to be further down. All right. Running low on time, but we're getting close. Okay, we'll